Skylar, great to see you. How are
Yes,
you
sir.
doing
Thank
today?
you. Doing well. It's a hot one, but good to be back in the studio and chatting with you. So hope you guys are doing well.
Okay. Uh, Tell us about yourself. What do you do as a business attorney?
Sure. So I am a business attorney, as you mentioned. I am licensed to practice law in Texas, in federal courts, and also the Court of International Trade, which is based in New York City. And primarily with small and medium-sized businesses, I assist with entity formation. So that's forming an LLC, forming a corporation. There's other structures out there, series LLCs, all sorts of different formations. We also draft contracts, so we deal with contract drafting, contract review, sometimes contract negotiation or disputes if that comes in. We help try to make those better and everybody get what they're supposed to. And beyond that, we just counsel on a multitude of business matters, from business strategy, risk mitigation, all sorts of other areas like that. So anything that's business related from a transaction standpoint, transactions being buying and selling or some type of a business transfer or business deal being done. Anything within the transactions world we do in the business side. The only thing we don't do basically is litigation, business litigation in particular. We don't go to court and sue people. It's not my strong suit, so I stay out of the courtroom.
And you work a lot with overseas business owners, especially Chinese. Um, why? Uh, how come you have so many connections in China?
Well, it's an effort on my part, frankly. I've been to China. I have not had as much success there with some of my business ventures myself. It's because China is a very unique market, but that experience, of course, has helped me. So has helped me relate to people doing business in China or business people from China coming to the United States. It's a conscious effort on my part and my firm's part because I believe that China is a growing and an important market to the world for a multitude of reasons. Just population, of course, being one of them, but also their geography, their natural resources and demographics is very important. And the more trade you do, the better friends you're going to make, and the more money generally everybody makes is the more trade going
Yeah.
on. But yeah, I have many good friends in China. I haven't been back in a while. I know right now it's travel's a bit touchy with quarantines and whatnot, but hopefully I'll be back in the near future. I still have a business visa for several more years, so be glad to be back when everything's back to normal.
Yeah, and as you know, we work a lot with Chinese investors. A lot of them are seeking investment opportunities in the U.S. And there's one question they bring up very frequently. It's about tax identification numbers.
Yes,
So there are different tax numbers like
yes,
SSN, EIN, ITIN, etc. So it's
yes.
confusing to them. Maybe you can explain a little bit about
Definitely,
these different numbers,
definitely.
what they
So
mean.
that's a very good question. Those acronyms and tax numbers. Very hard to get your head around for somebody who's not from the United States, and it's a conversation I have very often with people overseas. So let's start with first the SSN, which is a Social Security number. This is not likely to be relevant to non-U.S. residents or people who are overseas. So a Social Security number, the SSN, that is a unique identification number issued to every U.S. person, and a U.S. person being a U.S. citizen, a green card or permanent resident, and even some temporary residents as well. Temporary residents sometimes being refugees or people who have entered for limited purposes like employment or something like that. The SSN is issued to those U.S. persons. So, and what is designed to do originally was to track your contributions to the Social Security program. So
Right.
it is no longer used that way. It's used for a multitude of other reasons, as you know. and primarily it's become a unique identification number for both the public and private sectors, so that people can figure out who you are in particular, and figure out who you are and what your background is, which that SSN will be tied to your history essentially. So that's the SSN, the Social Security number. The next is the EIN. Oh, you know what? I take that back. Let's not jump into EIN. First, let's go to ITIN. It's a smaller of a leap. The ITIN is the International Taxpayer Identification Number. And sometimes you see it abbreviated as ITN. In the legal world, we still refer to it as an ITIN. So ITIN, ITIN. But anyway, so what that is, the International Taxpayer Identification Number, that is designed to be a unique identifier for non-U.S. persons, and in particular, non-U.S. persons who have an obligation to pay taxes to the U.S. government. So that would be foreign business owners, that would be non-permanent residents, or someone who has a reason to be in the U.S. but maybe not immigration. They will not be a U.S. person, but they will still incur certain obligations to the U.S. government and certain tax-paying debts and obligations. So the ITIN is issued to non-U.S. persons. There's a very specific process for the ITIN to be issued, and it's not easy, unfortunately. Just like an SSN, a Social Security number, the ITIN is not very easy to get if you're not issued one from birth, essentially. But there is a way to do it. It happens every day. But just understand that there's going to be a longer timeline to secure that and a more difficult process. And we can go into the process now, or we can wait. I know we have some other questions on it.
Just for now, we can explain the different terms.
Gotcha. Sure. So that's the ITIN. Next is the EIN. So the EIN is the Employer Identification Number. The EIN is the unique identifier for business entities. Now, business entities being either a corporation or an LLC or a limited partnership, any type of entity that is formed by business owners to operate a business, that is going to require an EIN. The EIN is important, just like the SSN and the ITIN. It's important because it allows you as a business to operate within the United States and incur tax obligations, which means buy and sell and generate business revenue. And also, very important, it allows you to open bank accounts. That's really the number one key for non-U.S. persons or business entities who need an EIN. We're usually securing it because they need a bank account. And that's the main factor there for it.
Yeah. So when let's say someone from an LLC in the U.S. and so obviously they need an EIN. But as I know, the profit or the income will pass through from the LLC
Correct.
to the owner.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
And the owner is the one who will be responsible for filing the taxes. So the owner still need an ITIN. Is that right?
Exactly. The process to get an EIN will require what's called the name escapes me now, but it's essentially a principal party or a principal owner, and that is the individual who the entity is going to be tied to in a tax database. So besides the EIN, you will also need an owner or a principal person or principal owner who will have their own SSN or ITIN. So that individual who is tied to the company with an EIN will have to have their own ITIN and SSN. And that's really what causes a lot of headaches for foreign persons, is that to get the EIN for their business, we have to usually go through the hoops to get them an ITIN, an International Taxpayer Identification Number, before we can get the documents for their company. And that's not an easy process, but it's done. It happens. It's just there's a lot of hoops we have to jump through to get that done.
We know when we apply for the EIN, it could be very simple. It can be done online. But for the foreign owners, can they do the same thing, or they need to go
So,
through another process?
good question. It can be done online with the owner, with the person who has ownership of that company, the responsible party, as the IRS refers to it. They can do it online, but they will need to already have an SSN or an ITIN. That's the important part, to do it online. And you can do it online very quickly, but you already need to have that first level, the first Social Security number or that ITIN before you can jump in and secure the EIN.
When you say it's not easy to get ITIN, what do you mean? What's the process like?
Securing an ITIN, the reason I say that it's difficult is that it takes quite a while, and it takes quite a few steps. And what that will entail is first collecting all of your documents. So you're going to need passports, ID cards, potentially some additional information about your U.S. entity or why you're applying for an ITIN. There is a set of documents that they recommend you have, but in my experience, they can always require more, and we've had to do that. We've had to prove what their business interest is in the United States, why we're requesting it, and things like that. So really collecting all of that beforehand is important, having that on file. The next step is usually the most difficult, and if you are physically overseas, the process is to get an ITIN is that you will have to be referred to or find and retain what's called an acceptance agent. And an acceptance agent is an individual or a company who has been pre-approved by the IRS to look at your documents, verify who you are, what you're doing, and then certify to the IRS that all of that is true and that you can be awarded and you can be issued an ITIN, an International Taxpayer Identification Number. So they are essentially the gatekeepers. They are going to be the ones who determine who gets what. They're going to be the ones that collect all of your documents. And the hard part being overseas is that there are many, several hundred. I don't recall the specific number, but I've run into it where there's not one for several hundred miles or several hundred kilometers of where my client is residing. So they will physically have to travel or set up an appointment with an acceptance agent to go somewhere and meet them and submit those documents, because you will have to submit them generally in person. There are some that I've seen in the last year now that are starting to do it online, but most of them do not, and that's kind of I'm not sure exactly how they do that process. I'm sure it's still very difficult, but probably in the next year or two after we record this, I'm sure that a lot of that will change because everyone's going digital.
Yeah.
But that's been the major hurdle, is physically going there to the acceptance agent and submitting those documents.
I didn't know it's so difficult to get an ITIN, because there are a lot of investors. They just buy real estate in the U.S. It didn't seem they have to go through all this difficult process to get ITINs. Do they need ITINs to invest in real estate?
Not necessarily. You can come and buy property in your own name, and that doesn't require an ITIN or an EIN, of course. Now, if you have tax obligations when you sell it, you probably will need an ITIN whenever you flip it or sell it to somebody, because you'll obviously incur a tax obligation at that point to the federal government for income tax, or potentially capital gains tax, depending on how long you've held it. So that would, whenever you sell, certainly you would need one. Before that, probably not, because most of the time your property taxes, so if it's real estate, you're dealing with property taxes are going to be local, and in my experience, typically the local jurisdiction is it's not necessary to show your Social Security or ITIN.
They have rent income. They have rent income.
Yep, if you have rental income, yes, you will be incurring a tax obligation on that revenue and on your income. So at some point you will need an ITIN and you will have to pay your taxes. There are CPAs who can assist with that, and there may be, I'm not positive on this because I'm not a CPA myself, I don't do the actual filings, but the way I've understood from some CPAs is that whenever you do have incur a tax obligation to the U.S. government and you are filing for the first time with your taxes, I believe there is a process during that tax filing to also secure an I-10.
Yeah, that's what I believe too.
Yeah,
The first
so
time you file tax returns, you can file a form and get
yes.
an ITN.
That's what I've heard. I've never done that myself, and the reason I haven't done that is because I don't handle the tax filings, the tax returns. I'm usually trying to help people get the bank account before they put money in the United States. So I'm dealing with it all before the tax obligation is incurred. But you are correct. From what I understand is that once you have a tax obligation to the government, they can issue that I-10. I don't know if it's any easier, but it may be quicker because they want you to pay your taxes. So, but before that, it's going to be very difficult to have a bank account in the United States.
And there's another term. I think you are a perfect person to explain it. There are many scenarios an investor would need to fill out a form called W-9.
Yep.
The W-9 is for so-called U.S. person to fill out. So by definition, what is a U.S. person? It's not only individuals. It includes corporations and LLCs.
Correct. Exactly. Yes, sir. Yep. So a U.S. person would be defined on the individual scale. It's going to be people who are U.S. citizens, who are permanent residents, who are lawfully residing within the United States. And that would be people, there are a lot of nuanced categories of immigrants and such, but generally if you are immigrating to the United States on a permanent basis, or you are in the United States for a temporary period, but you do have an employment status, you are allowed to be employed here temporarily while you're here, those would be categorized as U.S. persons. So basically you are living here, you are generating income here, and your home is America. Typically you are going to be a U.S. person. Very generally. Now, within an entity side, this is going to be U.S. Persons as an entity will be obviously entities who are formed within the United States. So that's going to be LLCs, corporations, limited partnerships who are created within a certain United States state. And that can be any state, obviously. Those will automatically be U.S. persons. U.S. persons of international entities they can be U.S. persons, and typically they will either have registered within a U.S. state to be operating legally within the United States, or they are already generating income in the United States. Those would categorize them as U.S. persons. And there are some more complex categories of that, but generally for our audience, that is going to be the two primary categories and the where they would fit.
Got you. So for our audience, let's say if someone who is a foreigner, he is not a U.S. person himself, but he forms an LLC in the U.S. and that LLC is a U.S. person.
Mm-hmm.
And when he do the transactions or investments, when he need to fill out a W-9 form, and so on the form he just lists his LLC's information. Is that how it works?
I want to say it's yes and no. I think there's probably some very specific questions I would have to ask on that scenario to give you a firm answer. But generally, if you are a non-U.S. person and your entity is a U.S. person, your entity is operating within the United States, if your entity has generated income within the United States and it qualifies for a tax burden, you as the owner will have a tax filing, but what you're going to have to lay out to the government, and I believe it's a W-9, and I think there's an extra form. I don't recall the specific form number for foreign persons, but anyways, you would fill out the W-9 with your LLC information. And here's a caveat, is that if there is any other income that you personally as an individual has generated within the United States or by any U.S. source, that will also need to be included. So yes, you are correct generally, but there are some special caveats to that, and they're from what I recall, there's going to be some additional forms just so that you can explain to the IRS your situation, that you are a foreigner with a U.S. entity that does U.S. business, but you personally do not have a tax obligation to the U.S. government other than your entity. And the reason that is important is because here's another interesting fact for U.S. persons, is that any U.S. person, so any U.S. citizen, any permanent resident, any temporary resident with employment status, they will be required to pay income tax on their income generated around the entire world. Any income anywhere, they will be required to pay taxes on it. So you want to make sure you're very careful with the IRS. You tell them, look, I'm not a U.S. person. I owe some taxes to the U.S. government, but not everything, right? So.
Okay. So we learned a lot from you about all these different terms and concepts. So how can you help foreign investors?
Sure. So where the Reidel law firm and where I would help foreign investors is right from the beginning, doing your due diligence. So depending on the transaction in particular, whether it's real estate or buying a business or starting a business, we can help you with understanding the risks, understanding what steps you need to take to protect yourself, and understanding the steps you'll need to take to consummate, to finish and complete the transaction. We do due diligence. We help with entity formation, of course, which is an important one. And then also we can help counsel just on the specifics, the nuances, and the complexities of doing business within the United States. And sometimes that would entail money transfers, figuring out how to move money and talk to people about how to do that safely, how to do it the right way. Obviously, folks in China, that's an important concern. And really any type of legal question, any legal matter we can help them with. If it's not something that I'm familiar with or it's not within a business law specialty, I'm happy to, I refer people all the time. I tell them, hey, I'm not the guy to talk to, but I know the person you need to sit down with, and I'll send them to those folks to make sure they get the right counsel and expertise. Now, in particular about how we can help with an EIN or an ITIN and an SSN, our assistance is much more limited because we are not an acceptance agent. There's a whole ball of trouble that we'd have to go through to do that. So we cannot verify your documents and get you an ITIN. We can help you with an EIN once you have the ITIN. But frankly, that's one of our gaps in our service. But what we can do is help point you in the right direction, help you find an acceptance agent within your country or within your geography, and then help you put together the documents to get that approved. But usually, in my experience, the acceptance agents are very professional. Usually they don't need me to do much once they have all the documents. But we're there, we're happy to be helpful wherever we can be.
Great. Thanks for coming to my show and sharing all this valuable information with us. And hope we can talk more in the future.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Your first video in my channel. I expect to see more.
I hope so. Definitely. Once we get back to Galveston, we'll have to do one together. Sit down. So.
Yes.
All right. Have a great day. We'll talk soon.
Talk soon.